A racial incident unfolds as an elderly woman is humiliated in the mall, her dignity trampled by two dismissive cops whose prejudice blinds him. As hurtful words fall upon her like heavy stones, she stands there, defenseless, trembling in silence. But just then, her son arrives. These cops are about to face an unexpected truth, one that could change everything. In the heart of downtown Seattle, the Pinecrest Mall buzzed with the lively energy of a weekend, its stores teeming with people from all walks of life. Sunlight filtered through the expansive skylights, casting warm glows over the diverse crowd that wove through shops, kiosks, and restaurants. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, couples shared quiet laughter, and friends snapped pictures beside holiday decorations as the soft strains of jazz floated through the air, mingling with the symphony of conversations, laughter, and the occasional cry from an overstimulated toddler. Angela Martin stepped into this familiar cacophony with a mission that brought an extra sparkle to her eyes. At 68, the retired school teacher carried a quiet authority and warmth that had made her beloved by her students and a cherished figure in her neighborhood. Today, however, her face was alight with a gentle smile, her eyes twinkling with the secret joy of a grandmother on a quest to surprise and spoil her grandson Alex, whose 6th birthday was just a week away. Dressed in a comfortable floral dress that swayed with each step and supported by soft sneakers that cushioned her steps, Angela paused briefly to consult the mall directory, taking in her surroundings. She knew Pinecrest Mall like the back of her hand, from the bright toy stores to the cozy little cafe tucked away by the bookstore. Her light cane tapped a comforting rhythm on the polished tiles, a steady beat that matched her unhurried pace. As she strolled, Angela's mind wandered back to her years in the classroom, where she'd witnessed generations of young minds light up with curiosity. Her students had often asked her why she always looked so happy. She'd smile and say, "Because every day is a chance to learn, to grow, and to find joy in the little things." It was a lesson she now cherished more than ever, especially in these later years, as the world around her seemed to move at a pace that sometimes felt overwhelming. Passing a colorful display of greeting cards, a bright red fire truck on one of the cards caught her eye. Memories of her son's childhood, filled with toy trucks and tales of heroes, brought a deeper smile to her face. She picked the card, imagining Alex's excitement at the sight of the fire truck, and tucked it into her purse alongside her shopping list. It was just one of the little touches that made her feel close to her family, even though they all led such busy lives now. Angela's list was a mix of ingredients for Alex's birthday cake and a few of his favorite treats. She'd planned every detail with the precision of a school lesson, determined to make this celebration memorable. Flour, eggs, sugar, cocoa powder, her cart slowly filled with the essentials, each item chosen with deliberate care. She lingered at the spice aisle, picking up vanilla extract and a small packet of sparkly candles, the kind that flicker and shimmer. Angela could already picture the surprise on Alex's face when he saw them atop his cake. Lost in her thoughts, Angela almost didn't notice the man in a dark uniform who had approached her from behind. The low hum of conversation around her faded slightly, and she felt an odd shift in the atmosphere, an invisible tension that crept into her awareness. She turned slowly, surprised to see 2 security officers standing just a few steps away, watching her intently. Their expressions were unreadable, their stances firm. "Ma'am, we need to talk to you," said one of the officers, his voice cutting through the air like a cold breeze. He was a tall, solidly built man with a badge gleaming on his chest, his gaze fixed intently on Angela. Angela's warm smile faded, replaced by a look of polite confusion. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her tone as calm and gentle as ever, though an undercurrent of concern laced her words. Her hand instinctively tightened around the handle of her cart as she looked between the 2 men, trying to gauge the situation. The second officer, slightly younger with an air of restrained impatience, crossed his arms. "We've received reports of shoplifting," he stated sharply, his gaze hardening as he looked at her. "We need you to come with us." Angela blinked, taken aback by the bluntness of his words. Shoplifting? Her mind reeled at the accusation, struggling to reconcile it with the mundane reality of her shopping list and birthday preparations. "No, sir," she responded, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor of uncertainty that stirred within her. "I was just about to check out." Everything I've taken, I plan to pay for. She thought of her grandson and the excitement she'd felt just moments ago. How had the morning taken such an abrupt, bewildering turn? The first officer didn't seem interested in her explanation. His stance remained rigid, his gaze unwavering. "Please come with us now," he insisted, taking a step closer. Angela's heart began to pound, the cold, prickling sensation of fear creeping up her spine. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding that would surely be resolved if they just looked at her receipt. Yet, as she glanced around, the faces of other shoppers were turned toward her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and something darker, something that felt almost like judgment. In their eyes, she wasn't just Angela Martin, a grandmother and retired teacher. She was a stranger, caught in an unsettling moment that challenged their assumptions and hers alike. Angela's fingers tightened around her receipt, her knuckles white with tension, as she looked up at the officers, who had now moved even closer. The air felt thick, pressing down on her as if the very walls of the mall were closing in. "Ma'am, if you could just follow us to the security office, we can sort this out quietly," the first officer suggested, his voice a mix of impatience and a forced tone of reassurance that did little to ease her discomfort. His partner stood rigid beside him, his gaze shifting toward the nearby crowd that had begun to gather, faces flickering with curiosity, skepticism, and whispers of judgment. Angela's mind whirled, her thoughts a chaotic tangle of disbelief and frustration. This was absurd, surreal even. She had been coming to this mall for decades, a familiar face among its halls, known by some of the store owners, and often sharing small conversations with the regulars she encountered. Yet here she was, being treated like a common criminal over a misunderstanding that could surely be cleared up with a simple glance at her receipt. But when she held it out, the paper trembling slightly in her hand, the officer merely brushed it aside with a dismissive look. "Protocol, ma'am," he stated flatly, his tone unyielding, as though reciting a rule he'd repeated countless times before. "We still need to verify everything in the office." He motioned toward a nondescript door marked "Private" across the way, the dark letters standing out against the pale wall like a warning. Angela hesitated, glancing around, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. She could feel the weight of the stares around her, each one adding to the ache building in her chest. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an affront to her dignity, an attack on her very identity. She was Angela Martin, a grandmother, a teacher, a neighbor, and she had never in her life been accused of anything like this. Reluctantly, she began to follow, her legs heavy as if rooted to the polished floor beneath her. Every step felt like a step away from her sense of self, a betrayal of the trust she'd always held in people's decency and fairness. The faces of other shoppers, now fully engaged in watching her shame unfold, blurred together in her vision, their expressions a blend of silent judgment and, perhaps worst of all, indifference. As they neared the security office, a sudden voice cut through the low hum of the mall's ambiance. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" The inquiry was sharp, filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern, and it drew Angela's gaze toward a woman approaching them briskly from the direction of the food court. Dressed in professional attire and carrying a laptop bag slung over her shoulder, the woman moved with a self-assuredness that seemed to command attention. It was Maria Gonzalez, a local journalist known for her community-focused columns in the Seattle Daily. She'd been at the mall working on a feature about small businesses when she noticed the commotion. Her instincts kicked in instantly, the kind that had driven her for years as a reporter, committed to uncovering the truth and standing up for fairness. Already her phone was in her hand, the camera recording as she closed the distance between herself and the small, tense group. "Can someone explain why this lady is being taken away?" Maria's tone was firm, yet laced with a genuine concern that seemed to momentarily unsettle the officers. She held her phone steady, capturing the scene, her gaze flickering between Angela's bewildered expression and the stern faces of the officers. The first officer stiffened, clearly annoyed by the interruption. He shifted his stance, his body language radiating a quiet resistance. "This is a private matter," he replied, his voice measured, but with an edge that betrayed his discomfort. "Please, no filming," he added, casting a pointed look at Maria's phone. But Maria was undeterred. She'd seen enough in her years of reporting to know when something wasn't right, and this situation set off all the alarms in her mind. "I'm just trying to understand what's happening," she responded, her voice rising slightly to emphasize her point. She turned the camera toward the crowd that had gathered, making it clear that she wasn't alone in her curiosity. "Like everyone else here." Angela felt a surge of gratitude for the journalist's intervention, though a pang of anxiety twisted in her stomach at the thought of the public spectacle it was becoming. She turned to Maria, her voice low and wavering slightly, the weight of her frustration and fear finally breaking through. "I was accused of shoplifting," she explained, her voice tinged with disbelief. "But I haven't taken anything. I was just about to pay." The crowd pressed in a bit closer, curious onlookers drawn by the unfolding drama, their expressions a mix of intrigue and quiet judgment. Angela's heart sank further. This was the last thing she wanted, to have her integrity questioned in front of strangers, to be reduced to nothing more than a public curiosity. The officers, realizing that the situation was beginning to attract too much attention, exchanged an uneasy glance. The first officer's shoulders seemed to sag slightly, the initial confidence in his stance waning as the reality of the situation set in. "Let's discuss this in the office, away from the crowd," he suggested more gently, perhaps understanding, even if only faintly, the impact this public scene was having on Angela. But the damage, as far as Angela was concerned, was already done. Every step toward the security office felt like a step deeper into a world where her dignity, her identity, was overshadowed by suspicion and misunderstanding. With Maria following closely behind, her camera still capturing every moment, Angela's thoughts raced with questions she couldn't quiet. How could this have happened? Would she be able to clear her name? And what would her friends, her family, think of this humiliating ordeal? As they neared the door to the security office, Angela felt a lump form in her throat, a sharp reminder of the helplessness that had overtaken her. She glanced back once, catching sight of the crowd that had gathered, their eyes filled with a mix of pity, fascination, and indifference that only deepened the ache in her chest. In that moment, Angela's world felt as though it had been tilted off its axis, her sense of security and trust in others shattered like glass. She could only hope that this nightmare would end soon, that she would find some way to reclaim the respect and peace that had been so unceremoniously stripped from her in the most public of ways. Inside the stark, fluorescent-lit security office, Angela sat in a sparse metal chair opposite the two officers. The room felt small and cold, a windowless cube with walls painted in sterile shades of gray and white. The only sounds were the hum of an overhead light and the occasional crackle from the officers' radios. Angela clasped her purse tightly in her lap, her fingers absently brushing the edges of her shopping list. The crinkling paper a small reminder of her original purpose that morning. The receipt she'd tried to show the officers earlier was still tucked inside, a silent testament to her innocence. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing off the comforting bustle of the mall outside. The sound intensified her growing sense of isolation and vulnerability. Sitting in this impersonal room, with walls that seemed to close in around her, she felt reduced to a mere suspect, her identity stripped away by the accusation hovering in the air. One of the officers, a man in his early 50s with a face marked by deep lines and a no-nonsense expression, took a seat behind a desk cluttered with monitors. The screens displayed various angles of the mall's interior. People browsing, chatting, children playing, all oblivious to the quiet turmoil unfolding within these walls. "Now, let's sort this out," the officer said, his tone polite yet detached, as though Angela were merely another name on a long list. His expression conveyed neither warmth nor malice, but rather a bureaucratic indifference that only deepened Angela's sense of isolation. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Angela began explaining her side of the story, her voice steadier now that she was away from the scrutinizing eyes of the public. She spoke slowly and clearly, recounting each item she'd placed in her cart, and the moment she'd been stopped by security. Her voice softened slightly as she described the sparkly candles, a small but meaningful purchase for her grandson's birthday, a reminder of the joy and love that had filled her thoughts before the day had taken this nightmarish turn. Across the room, Maria Gonzalez stood quietly by the door, her phone now off, but her presence a visible reminder that Angela was not alone in this. Her gaze met Angela's, and she offered a small nod of encouragement, her silent support a comforting balm amid the cold formality of the security office. The faintest trace of a smile passed between them, a reminder that someone still saw Angela as more than an accusation. Meanwhile, the younger officer, who looked to be in his late 20s and had been silent until now, was seated beside the main desk, scrolling through the security footage on a nearby screen. His face was more open, his expression one of curiosity mixed with unease as he reviewed the video, searching for any sign of wrongdoing. Angela could see his brow furrow slightly as he watched, and for a moment, hope stirred within her. Perhaps he would see the truth, and this nightmare would finally end. Outside the office, unknown to Angela, her son Michael was already at the mall, racing against time to reach her. The moment he had received her frantic call, he had dropped everything, barely taking the time to grab his car keys. Anger and worry churned within him, a storm of emotions that grew with each passing minute. Michael was a man of measured words and calm demeanor, but the thought of his mother, a woman of impeccable character, who had dedicated her life to helping others, being accused and detained like a criminal tore at his heart. Driving with a singular focus, Michael's mind raced with thoughts of what he might say or do to defend her, legal avenues he might pursue, ways to ensure her dignity remained intact despite this unjust ordeal. He parked hastily near the mall entrance, barely registering the disapproving glance of a security guard as he made his way inside. His long strides carried him quickly toward the security office, each step resonating with a mix of urgency and resolve. Back in the office, Angela sat quietly, her hands resting in her lap, as the younger officer continued to review the footage. She watched him intently, her hope building as she noticed the puzzled frown on his face. Finally, he paused the footage on a frame that showed her at the checkout counter, her actions clear and unambiguous as she waited in line, her items neatly arranged in the cart. "I don't see anything here that supports the accusation," he admitted, his voice hesitant but firm as he turned the screen toward his partner. The older officer leaned forward, peering at the screen, the lines on his forehead deepening as he took in the image. For the first time, his face softened slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. The older officer let out a sigh, the rigid lines of protocol and procedure seeming to clash with the visible evidence before him. He rubbed his forehead, the mask of authority slipping momentarily to reveal a glimpse of the person beneath. He looked directly at Angela, his tone softer now, almost contrite. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mrs. Martin," he said, his words careful, though his expression remained guarded. "It seems there might have been a mistake." Angela's shoulders sagged slightly with relief, though the sting of humiliation still lingered, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of anger and lingering embarrassment. She clutched her purse a little tighter, as if holding on to a piece of herself, a reminder of the life she'd led, a life of integrity and kindness that had never before been questioned. A sharp knock rattled the silence, shattering the uneasy calm that had filled the room. The door swung open with force, and Michael stepped inside, his imposing frame seeming to fill the entire doorway. His eyes burned with a controlled fury, taking in every detail of the scene. The officers seated stiffly, his mother across from them, her face pale but composed, yet unmistakably weary. "Mom," he said, his voice cutting through the thick air, carrying an edge that made the officers straighten in their seats. "Are you okay?" Angela's face softened at the sight of her son, a mix of relief and something else, a glimmer of strength renewed by his presence. "Michael," she replied quietly, her voice steady, yet edged with the exhaustion of the ordeal. "I'm all right, just shaken." Michael's gaze snapped from his mother to the officers, his jaw tightening as he took in their rigid postures. His voice dropped, low and cold. "I want a full explanation, now." Each word landed like a warning, sending a clear message that he wasn't here to be placated or brushed off. "You detained my mother, accused her without evidence, and humiliated her in front of strangers. I want to know exactly how this happened." The younger officer looked away, an unmistakable flicker of discomfort crossing his face. The older officer attempted to reclaim a professional demeanor, straightening in his chair, though his voice was tinged with unease. "We were acting on a report from a store employee," he explained carefully, but the excuse felt hollow in the charged air. "It appears there may have been some confusion." Michael's eyes narrowed, and a bitter scoff escaped him. "Confusion?" His gaze flicked to the security footage still frozen on the screen. "This isn't a small mistake. Detaining someone without clear evidence is a serious breach of protocol." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Tell me, what kind of training do your staff receive to handle accusations like these?" The officers shifted uncomfortably under Michael's piercing stare, their earlier confidence now visibly eroded. Maria, standing quietly in the corner, raised her phone discreetly, catching every exchange, knowing this was a moment of raw accountability. Her presence was a silent reminder that the actions here wouldn't be easily buried or ignored. Clearing his throat, the younger officer spoke, though his voice held none of its initial authority. "We apologize for the distress we've caused. There are protocols, but in this instance—" He hesitated, glancing nervously at his partner. "We acted hastily." The admission hung heavily, each word weighed down by a reluctant acceptance of fault that seemed to shift the power in the room. Angela, who had stayed silent throughout the exchange, straightened in her seat. Her eyes were clear and resolute as she met the older officer's gaze, her voice calm but edged with steel. "I appreciate the apology," she began, every word measured, striking deeper than any raised voice could. "But an apology doesn't erase the shame I felt walking through that mall, watched like I was a criminal." She leaned forward slightly, her tone firm. "This could have been resolved quietly. Instead, I was humiliated. I hope you'll think about what that does to a person." Her words lingered, heavy with the weight of dignity reclaimed. Maria continued to record, each moment captured, her journalistic instincts ensuring that Angela's strength and resilience would be preserved, her words a stark reminder of what had been at stake. Michael's hand came to rest on his mother's shoulder, his gaze softening for a brief moment as he helped her to her feet. Turning to Maria, he gave her a curt nod of thanks, while her camera caught the final moments as they headed toward the door. The confrontation was over, but for Angela, the memory would remain, an ordinary day transformed into a fight for dignity. Stepping back into the mall, Angela took a steadying breath, leaning slightly on her son as they moved through the now silent crowd. She glanced back only once, her eyes sweeping over the quiet faces, her earlier distress now replaced by something stronger, a hardened resolve that spoke of battles yet to come. Walking through the mall together, Angela leaned slightly on her son, her earlier distress gradually giving way to a sense of weary resolve. The crowd that had gathered earlier had largely dispersed, leaving only the faint echoes of whispers in their wake. The mall's once familiar surroundings now felt foreign, the experience casting a shadow over a place that had once been a source of simple joy. As they made their way toward the exit, Maria caught up with them, her expression respectful, her tone gentle. "Mrs. Martin, may I speak with you both for a moment?" She kept her distance, aware of the emotional toll the experience had taken on Angela, but hopeful that they would see the value in sharing their story more widely. Angela looked at Michael, who nodded, his protective stance easing slightly as he recognized the sincerity in Maria's gaze. "Yes, of course," he replied, his tone firm yet open, ready to support his mother in whatever choice she made regarding her story. Maria quickly outlined her intentions, explaining her desire to feature Angela's story prominently, not as a mere incident, but as a reflection of deeper issues within the community and the need for systemic change. She spoke passionately about the importance of accountability, about the role of journalism in amplifying voices that often went unheard. "Your experience," she said gently, "highlights a critical issue that we can't afford to ignore. With your permission, I'd like to share your story in a way that could spark a meaningful conversation, maybe even change." Angela considered her words carefully, her gaze thoughtful as she weighed the decision. The ordeal had shaken her, but it had also ignited something within her, a desire to protect others from facing the same humiliation, to ensure that her story would serve a purpose beyond her own experience. She nodded slowly, a faint smile crossing her tired face as she turned to Maria. "If it can help someone else, then yes," she said quietly, her voice carrying a strength that belied her earlier vulnerability. "Let's do it." Maria's eyes brightened with gratitude, and she extended her hand in a gesture of solidarity. "Thank you, Mrs. Martin," she replied, her voice warm. "I promise to handle your story with the respect it deserves." As they parted ways, Michael and Angela walked toward the exit, a mix of emotions swirling within them. Relief, anger, but also a sense of purpose that had emerged from the day's events. The morning had started as a simple trip to the mall, a routine outing filled with plans for birthday party supplies. Yet it had transformed into something far greater. It was now a fight for respect, a stand against an injustice that, though small in scale, carried deep personal and societal implications. In the aftermath of their unsettling encounter with mall security, Angela and Michael sought a quiet corner of the food court, hoping to regain a sense of normalcy after the morning's ordeal. The area bustled with the usual sounds of shoppers, but they managed to find a relatively secluded spot by a large window overlooking the city streets below. Angela's hands trembled slightly as she set her purse on the table, her movements slow and deliberate, as though each gesture were a way to process the lingering distress from earlier. Michael observed his mother closely, his heart heavy with a mixture of anger and protectiveness. He had always admired her strength, her resilience, and her unwavering commitment to her family and community. But today, seeing her seated across from him, her face still carrying the faint shadows of humiliation and exhaustion, he felt a fierce determination to seek justice. He wasn't content to let this incident fade into a painful memory. He wanted to ensure that her dignity was restored, her voice heard, and the wrongs she had endured addressed. Taking a sip of his coffee, Michael broke the silence, his voice soft but resolute. "Mom, I'm going to contact a few colleagues of mine. We need to discuss what legal actions we can take, not just to hold mall security accountable, but to address the larger issues this situation has highlighted. No one should have to go through what you did today." Angela stirred her tea slowly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fatigue and quiet resolve. She took a steadying breath, meeting her son's gaze with a look that conveyed both gratitude and caution. "Michael, I know you're upset, and I appreciate you standing up for me, but I don't want this to consume us." Her tone was gentle but firm, a reminder of the balance she always tried to maintain in life. "What happened today was wrong, but I want to make sure we handle this the right way, thoughtfully, purposefully." Michael nodded, understanding her perspective and her desire to find justice without letting anger cloud their actions. His mother had always been a voice of reason, a grounding force in his life, and he knew that her wisdom would be essential in guiding their next steps. "Of course, Mom. We'll take every step carefully," he assured her, his tone steady. "We'll consult with the right people, gather the evidence, and make sure we're not just reacting. If there's a way to use this to make things better for others, then that's what we should focus on." Their conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of Angela's phone. She glanced at the screen, recognizing a message from Maria Gonzalez, the journalist who had witnessed the incident. Maria had already drafted a preliminary article and wanted Angela's consent to proceed with publishing it. She also asked if Angela would be willing to participate in a more formal interview to delve deeper into the story, allowing her to share her perspective fully. Angela passed her phone to Michael, letting him read the message. His eyes scanned the screen, his expression thoughtful as he took in Maria's words. He could see the sincerity in the journalist's tone, her commitment to highlighting Angela's experience in a way that would resonate with the community. "This could be a good opportunity, Mom," he said, looking up. "It's a chance to control the narrative, to tell your story truthfully, and to emphasize the need for accountability and respect in situations like these. Maria seems genuinely interested in helping to make a positive change." Angela considered his words, her gaze drifting to the bustling crowd around them. She had always been a private person, content with her quiet life, her close-knit family, and her small circle of friends. But today had changed something within her, igniting a desire to use her experience to help others, to ensure that no one else would have to endure the humiliation and fear she had felt. After a moment, she nodded, a faint smile crossing her face. "You're right, Michael. I think it's time we tell this story, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever felt powerless in a moment of misunderstanding." With Angela's approval, Michael drafted a response to Maria, expressing their interest in collaborating on the story and their willingness to participate in a formal interview. He also mentioned their intent to seek legal counsel, ensuring that they were protected and that any actions they might take against the mall were handled professionally and thoughtfully. A few days later, they met with Maria in a cozy neighborhood cafe, its warm atmosphere a stark contrast to the cold sterility of the security office where their ordeal had begun. Maria greeted them with a warm smile, her eyes conveying a genuine empathy that immediately put Angela at ease. They chose a table by the window where the sunlight filtered through, casting soft patterns on the wooden surface between them. As the interview began, Maria's questions were thoughtful and respectful, allowing Angela to share her experience in her own words. Angela spoke candidly about the fear and humiliation she had felt, the surreal experience of being accused without cause, and the sense of betrayal that had settled over her as she was led through the mall like a criminal. She paused at times, her voice catching as memories resurfaced. But each time, Michael reached across the table, his hand a steady anchor that reminded her she was no longer alone in this fight. Michael, too, shared his perspective, discussing the legal aspects they were exploring, and their hopes to inspire improvements in how security personnel were trained and how incidents were handled. He spoke with a calm authority, his words measured and precise, his focus always on the broader issues rather than personal grievances. "This isn't just about my mother," he explained, his gaze steady as he addressed Maria. "It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background, age, or appearance, is treated with respect and fairness. We're not just seeking justice for her. We're advocating for a better system." Maria listened intently, her pen moving swiftly across her notepad as she captured each detail, each emotion, each conviction. She had covered countless stories in her career, but there was something about Angela and Michael's determination, their quiet strength, that resonated deeply with her. This was more than a story. It was a call to action, a reminder of the power of community and family, and the importance of standing up for what was right. The article was published the following week, making waves in the local community and sparking conversations about security practices in public spaces. It featured Angela's story prominently, painting a vivid picture of the distress such incidents could cause and the need for systemic change. The response was overwhelming, with readers flooding Maria's inbox with messages of support, sharing their own experiences, and calling for accountability from the mall management. Meanwhile, Michael pursued a formal complaint against the mall, which led to an internal investigation. The mall's management, realizing the gravity of the situation and the potential damage to their reputation, reached out to Angela and Michael, offering a formal apology and a promise to review their security procedures. They also proposed a meeting with Angela to discuss how they could improve their protocols, a gesture that, while appreciated, felt like only the beginning of a much larger conversation. A few weeks later, Angela and Michael met with the mall's management team, their expressions resolute as they outlined their expectations for meaningful change. The management team listened attentively, acknowledging the flaws in their current system and expressing a commitment to implementing better training programs for their security staff. They also offered compensation for the distress caused, which Angela accepted with the intention of donating part of it to a local community center, a place she had long supported in her neighborhood. This resolution brought a sense of closure, a quiet relief that began to heal the wounds left by that day. Yet, for Angela, it was not the end but the beginning of a new chapter, one in which she would continue to advocate for dignity, respect, and justice. She had once been a teacher, a mentor to countless students, instilling in them values of kindness and resilience. Now, she found herself in a new role, one she had never anticipated, yet one that felt as meaningful as any lesson she had ever taught. As they left the meeting, walking out of the mall and into the crisp autumn air, Angela felt a sense of accomplishment, mixed with a hope that her experience might prevent others from enduring the same humiliation. She glanced at Michael, her heart swelling with pride at his strength, his unwavering support. "Thank you, Michael," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how I could have done this without you." Michael smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they walked. "You've always been there for me, Mom," he replied, his voice warm. "This was my turn to be there for you." Together they continued down the street, their bond strengthened by the challenges they had faced, their hearts lifted by the promise of a better future, a future where respect and understanding would stand at the forefront of every interaction, and where no one, not even a quiet grandmother on a mission to buy birthday candles, would ever have to question their own worth. Angela's story, echoed through Maria's powerful article, quickly spread across the community, igniting a wave of conversations about justice, respect, and accountability. The narrative struck a chord, stirring both sympathy and a newfound awareness of the flaws in systems that people had long taken for granted. Over the following weeks, the Seattle Daily's inbox overflowed with emails from readers who shared similar experiences, or simply expressed their outrage over the treatment Angela had endured. Her story wasn't just an isolated incident. It became a rallying point, a moment of reckoning for a community ready for change. The public response led to a series of town hall meetings organized by local leaders, who invited residents, law enforcement officials, and business owners to discuss the issues that Angela's experience had brought to light. The first meeting took place on a chilly evening in the community center, its modest hall packed with people from all walks of life. Angela and Michael arrived together, greeted by familiar faces, friends, and strangers who offered warm smiles and encouraging words. Angela felt a surge of gratitude for the support, though a part of her still struggled to reconcile the idea of being at the center of such a movement. As they entered the hall, Michael guided his mother to a seat near the front, his hand resting reassuringly on her shoulder. The room buzzed with a mixture of anticipation and quiet determination as people settled in, some holding copies of Maria's article, others carrying signs advocating for justice and fair treatment. The turnout was far greater than anyone had anticipated, a testament to the depth of feeling Angela's story had stirred within the community. Angela glanced around, her heart swelling with a blend of pride and humility. She had never sought attention or acclaim. Her life had always been dedicated to quietly nurturing her family, her students, her friends. Yet here she was, her voice, her story, a beacon that had drawn people together. As the crowd quieted and the meeting began, Angela felt a sense of purpose, a clarity that she hadn't anticipated. The town hall opened with an introduction from the community center director, a middle-aged woman named Linda, who had been a longtime friend of Angela's. Linda spoke briefly about the purpose of the meeting, highlighting the importance of listening, understanding, and finding ways to prevent incidents like Angela's from happening again. She then invited Angela to share her story, her voice calm, but carrying a depth of emotion that conveyed the weight of the experience. Angela stood, her hands clasped in front of her, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and began to speak. Her voice soft but filled with conviction. She recounted her experience with quiet dignity, describing the confusion, the fear, the humiliation she had felt. She spoke not as a victim, but as a member of the community, someone who believed in the values of respect and fairness, and who hoped for a future where such values were upheld in every interaction. As Angela spoke, the room was silent, each person hanging on her words, their faces reflecting a mixture of empathy and determination. She concluded her story by addressing the broader issues, the need for sensitivity and accountability, the importance of treating every person with respect, regardless of age, appearance, or background. Her words resonated deeply, sparking nods and murmurs of agreement throughout the room. Michael observed his mother with a sense of awe, his admiration for her strength, growing with each word she spoke. He had always known her as a woman of quiet resilience, but today he saw a new side of her, a leader, an advocate, someone unafraid to stand before her community and speak her truth. As she took her seat, Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of pride and support. Following Angela's testimony, other residents began to share their own experiences, some recounting incidents of unfair treatment, others speaking about loved ones who had faced similar injustices. A retired firefighter spoke of the racial profiling he had endured, despite his years of service. A young mother shared the challenges her teenage son had faced as a person of color navigating public spaces. Each story added weight to the discussion, a reminder that Angela's experience was part of a larger, systemic issue that required meaningful change. The evening continued with passionate discussions and proposals for action. Residents suggested initiatives such as cultural sensitivity training for security personnel, more rigorous oversight of security procedures, and regular community engagement sessions to foster trust and understanding. Michael took notes diligently, his mind racing with ideas, his legal expertise coming into play as he considered how these suggestions might translate into tangible policies. Among the attendees were representatives from the mall management team who listened intently, their expressions a mixture of concern and humility. They knew the impact Angela's story had made, not only on their business but on their own perceptions of community responsibility. They expressed a willingness to work with local leaders, acknowledging the need for change and pledging to support new initiatives that would improve interactions between security staff and the public. As the evening drew to a close, Linda announced the formation of a new community advisory board, a group that would work closely with local businesses, law enforcement, and residents to address issues of accountability and respect. The board would include a diverse range of voices, from community leaders to ordinary citizens, each one committed to building a safer, more inclusive environment. Angela was invited to serve as an honorary member of the board, a role she accepted with quiet humility. The idea of becoming a community advocate was new to her, yet she felt a strong sense of duty, a desire to contribute to the work that had already begun. She knew that her experience, painful as it was, had a purpose that extended beyond her own story and touched the lives of countless others. Over the following weeks, the board held regular meetings, bringing together people from all corners of the community. Angela attended each session, sharing her insights, listening to others, and gradually finding her voice as an advocate. She spoke about the importance of empathy, of understanding the experiences and struggles of others, and of creating policies that respected the dignity of every individual. At one meeting, Michael presented a proposal for a comprehensive training program designed to teach security personnel about cultural sensitivity, conflict de-escalation, and community engagement. The program, developed with input from local activists and experts, aimed to equip security staff with the tools they needed to handle situations with compassion and respect. Michael's proposal was met with enthusiastic support, and the mall management team pledged to implement the program as part of their ongoing commitment to positive change. Angela's role expanded as the board's initiatives took shape. She led workshops, sharing her story as a way to foster understanding and empathy among security personnel. Her sessions were filled with heartfelt conversations, each one an opportunity to bridge the gap between strangers, to break down the barriers that so often led to misunderstanding and mistrust. Through these efforts, Angela became a respected figure in the community, her voice a symbol of resilience and hope. She was invited to speak at local schools, community centers, and public events, her message resonating with people of all ages and backgrounds. She shared her story not to seek sympathy, but to inspire others to stand up for justice, to believe in the power of kindness, and to work toward a future where dignity and respect were the foundation of every interaction. The mall management team, true to their word, organized a press conference to announce the new training programs and to reaffirm their commitment to improving security practices. They acknowledged Angela's role in sparking these changes, expressing their gratitude for her courage and her willingness to work with them toward a common goal. The press conference was a powerful moment, a testament to the positive impact of Angela's advocacy, and a reminder that change, while often difficult, was always possible. In the weeks that followed, Michael took on a more prominent role in the community outreach efforts, helping to coordinate meetings, drafting proposals, and working with local leaders to ensure the initiatives were implemented effectively. He saw his work not just as a way to support his mother, but as a way to honor the values she had instilled in him, a commitment to justice, to compassion, to making a difference in the lives of others. Angela, too, found a renewed sense of purpose. Her days, once filled with quiet routines, now brimmed with activity, with the energy and passion of a movement that she had helped to inspire. She continued to work with the advisory board, attending meetings, leading workshops, and serving as a mentor to younger advocates who looked up to her as a role model. As autumn turned to winter and the first snowfall dusted the streets of Seattle, Angela reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of her grandson, whose birthday celebration had been the catalyst for a day that changed her life. She thought of the faces she had seen at the town hall meetings, the stories she had heard, the friendships she had formed, and she thought of the countless lives that might be touched by the work they had begun. Sitting by her window one evening, Angela penned a letter to her community newsletter, sharing her thoughts on the power of resilience, the importance of unity, and the potential for change that lay within each person. Change, she wrote, begins with a single voice, a single act of courage, and healing. True healing comes when we stand together, when we embrace our shared humanity, and when we believe in the possibility of a better tomorrow. Her words resonated deeply, reaching not only her immediate community, but spreading across social media, inspiring others to engage in similar dialogues, to advocate for respect, and to work toward a future where dignity and justice were the rights of all. And in that quiet moment, Angela felt a profound sense of peace, a peace that came from knowing that her journey, though unexpected, had led to something beautiful, something meaningful. She was no longer just a retired teacher, a grandmother, a quiet presence in her community. She was an advocate, a voice for justice, a beacon of hope for those who might follow in her footsteps. Weeks passed since that distressing day at the mall, but Angela's story continued to ripple through the community, sparking conversations that reached far beyond the initial incident. Angela had become a local advocate for dignity and respect, a role that felt both natural and surprising. For years, she had been a quiet presence, a teacher content with nurturing her students, and a grandmother doting on her family. But now, her influence stretched across neighborhoods, schools, and community groups, inspiring others to take part in building a more compassionate society. Angela and Michael's efforts culminated in a formal initiative, Community Bridge. The project, spearheaded by Michael and supported by various local leaders, aimed to bridge the gap between law enforcement, business owners, security staff, and the public. It became a forum where residents could voice their concerns, share their experiences, and propose solutions for fostering mutual respect in public spaces. With its growing success, the initiative gained citywide recognition, attracting individuals and organizations interested in supporting its mission. One of Community Bridge's key successes was a series of workshops led by Angela herself. She crafted these sessions with a focus on empathy and conflict de-escalation, designing them to be interactive and thought-provoking. Each workshop began with her story, a deeply personal account that struck a chord with her listeners, especially the young security staff and police officers attending. She spoke not to blame, but to encourage understanding, to show them how a moment of misjudgment could impact someone's life in ways they might never realize. In her workshops, Angela often used examples drawn from her own life as a teacher. She shared stories of students who had once struggled, who'd needed patience, encouragement, and second chances to reach their potential. Her message was simple yet powerful. Every person deserved to be seen, to be understood, and to be treated with respect. Her words left a lasting impression, and as the sessions progressed, Angela saw a shift in her audience, a softening in their eyes, a quiet determination to approach their work with greater compassion. As Community Bridge gained momentum, the city's local news covered the initiative, highlighting Angela's contributions and the transformative effect her story had on Seattle's public spaces. The mall where her experience had begun became the first establishment to adopt the program, implementing new guidelines for security training based on the workshops Angela had developed. The mall's management team expressed their gratitude publicly, inviting Angela and Michael to speak at a press event announcing the changes. Standing before the crowd, Angela felt a mixture of pride and humility, aware of the journey that had brought her here and the lives that had been touched along the way. Winter settled over Seattle, bringing a quiet beauty to the city as snow dusted the streets and frosted the edges of shop windows. Angela's life had become a blur of activity, her days filled with meetings, workshops, and gatherings where she connected with community members, listening to their stories and sharing her own. She found a new sense of purpose, a passion that rejuvenated her spirit and gave her a renewed appreciation for the resilience of the human heart. One snowy evening, as Angela sat by the window with a cup of tea, she took a moment to reflect on all that had transpired. The streetlights cast a soft glow over the freshly fallen snow, illuminating the quiet neighborhood outside. It had been a whirlwind of emotions, of challenges and triumphs, and yet she felt grateful. Grateful for the support of her family, for the strength she had found within herself, and for the community that had rallied around her, transforming her experience into a catalyst for change. Her thoughts turned to her grandson, Alex, whose birthday had been the reason for her fateful trip to the mall. Alex had been too young to understand the details of what had happened, but he sensed the changes in his grandmother, her new energy, her dedication to something bigger than herself. Sitting beside him one day, she had told him that she was working on something special, something that would help make the world a kinder place. "Will it help other people too, Grandma?" he'd asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, smiling as she ruffled his hair. "It's for everyone." Her words had resonated with him, and that day, Alex had surprised her by drawing a picture of them standing together under a banner that read, "Kindness for All." He had decorated the banner with sparkly stars and tiny hearts, his small hands working diligently to capture the spirit of his grandmother's new role. Angela kept the picture pinned to her desk as a reminder of the purpose behind her work, a symbol of the love that fueled her every step. One evening, as Angela sat on her porch watching the snow fall, Michael joined her with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. He settled into the chair beside her, his presence a comforting reminder of the journey they had taken together. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in thought, before Michael turned to her, his gaze filled with admiration. "Mom," he began, his voice quiet but full of emotion, "I don't think I've ever told you how proud I am of you. The way you've handled everything, the workshops, the community events, the board meetings. You've inspired so many people." Angela smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at her son. "I couldn't have done any of it without you, Michael. You were there when I needed you most, and you've given me the strength to keep going." She paused, glancing down at the steaming mug in her hands. "This journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. And knowing that we're making a difference, it fills me with hope." Michael nodded, his gaze thoughtful as he watched the snow fall. "You've done more than make a difference, Mom. You've created a legacy, one that will last long after today." Angela's heart swelled at his words, a deep sense of peace settling over her. She thought of the people who had come into her life through this journey, the stories they had shared, the moments of connection that had bridged divides she hadn't even realized existed. She was no longer just Angela Martin, a retired teacher and grandmother. She was an advocate, a voice for justice, a symbol of resilience and hope. The next morning, Angela's phone chimed with a message from a local organization that had heard about Community Bridge and wanted to partner with them to bring the program to other cities in Washington. They proposed a series of events where Angela would speak, sharing her journey and inspiring others to advocate for kindness and respect. It was an opportunity she hadn't expected, a chance to extend her reach beyond her own community and make a difference on a larger scale. Angela read the message twice, her mind racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. She felt a familiar tug of apprehension, a reminder of her quiet life before all of this began. But as she looked at the drawing Alex had made, the banner with its sparkly stars and the words, "Kindness for All," her doubts faded. She knew this was her path, her calling, and she was ready to embrace it fully. As the weeks passed, Angela traveled to nearby cities, her story spreading and her message resonating with new audiences. She met countless individuals who shared their own experiences, their struggles and hopes, and each interaction deepened her commitment to the cause. She saw the impact of her words in the way people's faces softened, in the way they listened with open hearts, and in the changes that began to take root within their own communities. By spring, Community Bridge had expanded into a statewide initiative, its reach extending beyond Seattle to touch lives across Washington. Angela became a familiar face at public events, her presence a reminder of the power of resilience, of the importance of standing up for one's beliefs, and of the beauty that lay in compassion and understanding. Her journey had begun with a moment of injustice, a painful experience that had threatened to strip away her sense of self. But through the love of her family, the support of her community, and her own unwavering determination, Angela had transformed that moment into something beautiful, something lasting. Sitting on her porch one warm evening, with Alex playing at her feet and Michael by her side, Angela looked out at the garden, its flowers blooming in vibrant colors. She felt a deep sense of peace, a contentment that came from knowing that her life had taken on a new purpose, a purpose rooted in love and guided by hope. This all started with such a dark moment, she mused, watching as Alex chased a butterfly across the yard. But look at what it's brought us, a chance to make a difference. Michael nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of pride and resolve. It's just the beginning, Mom. There's so much more we can do, so much more that will be done. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the yard, Angela felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey had been unexpected, the path winding and often challenging. But it had led her here, to this moment, surrounded by love, by hope, and by the promise of a future filled with kindness. With Michael by her side and a growing network of friends, supporters, and fellow advocates, Angela was ready to continue her work. She was no longer just a witness to injustice. She was a force for change, a voice for those who could not speak, a beacon of resilience and hope. And as she watched her grandson laugh and play in the fading light, she knew that her journey was far from over. It was only beginning. This story concludes here. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on the heartfelt stories I'm dedicated to bringing to you. Your support is a precious motivation for me to continue this journey, and I am truly grateful to have you as part of it.